This is Lisa Sanderson with UF-IFAS Extension in Sumter County for Let's Talk Gardening. Today I'm going to talk about how to sharpen your pruning tools. Alright, so I have a couple pairs of pruners, one which I'm going to clean, one which I've worked on already. So this is a pair of Felcos with a rotating handle, and so I actually had made the mistake of leaving these in the garden, and so they rusted actually pretty badly by the time I'd found them, and so they were pretty much locked up. But I have taken care of these. I took them all apart, and so now you can see that they are working just fine. I had to take everything apart on these, and so there are occasions where people do like to take pruners apart to make sure that all the parts are cleaned if they're having issues with their hand pruners. And so this is I'm glad to be able to use these in the garden again, and so this is something that is designed for people who may have issues with their hands. It makes it a little ergonomically easier for repeated pruning events. Okay, so that is great for those. The other one I have is another pair of pruners. It doesn't have a name on it, but it could be any kind of pruner that you have at home. And so you can see that these are also rusted, and we'll see how we can get these cleaned up. And so they have a little clasp down at the bottom. You can see that they still move great, but the blade itself has gotten rusted. So one of those things I'm going to do first of all is see if I have any sap issues, and so I've got some material to clean off any kind of sap, and we'll see how that works on this blade. I want you to make sure that if you are going to be doing any cleaning of pruners, that even if they're not very sharp, you watch out for the blade when you're doing the work. You do not want to have any problems with cutting yourself accidentally on one of the blades. Now I have a couple other things that I like to use for the cleanup part of it before we sharpen. I like to actually have a coarser steel wool and a finer steel wool, and I usually start with the coarser steel wool. Some people may use brushes. They might be a bit abrasive, and so you can go through and see if this will start to work on cleaning off a good bit of the rust. And so it may be that you do this a few times to get the blade as clean as you would like to have, and you can see some of the rust seems to be coming up. And so there are other things you can use to clean, but I really think that being able to use some of the steel wool will help to deal with some of those issues. And it may not be perfect, but hopefully that will take care of it. Ideally, you are taking care of these for people who are using pruners more often, maybe cleaning them obviously more often and taking care of the investment that they have. The other thing I sometimes will use is a little bit of olive oil if I am doing any kind of cleaning or wanting to clean blades up, and then I'm taking a look to see how these look, to see what else I need to do with them. Okay, and then I usually get the finer steel wool to do a little bit of cleanup. And this is what I do before I sharpen. it. So now to sharpen these, there's a couple of tools I could use. Some people like to use a whetstone, and so I don't happen to have a whetstone. I do have a small round file, so this is one of two things I could use. It's nice to be able to get something into closer to where the blade starts, right at the beginning down here. And so if you are doing this, you have a certain bevel to this blade that you don't want to change. So when you start to move, you're going to want to make sure that you are following the angle of that blade as you go through. And you can see some spots where there's been some cutting that's happened that's been a little bit maybe done some damage to the blade. You want to ensure that that doesn't happen, and maybe do the sharpening so that you can get past that. The other thing I use is this one is a flat carbide sharpener, and so that's another one that you can use. And again, you want to make sure it will go to mostly to the inside, and you want to make sure that you are keeping the bevel of the blade that you're sharpening. And then also be careful as you're doing this so that you don't accidentally cut yourself. The other thing you're going to want to do is after you're done, you may check with your finger just to lightly to make sure that you don't have any kind of burrs that show up on the back side, and it doesn't seem to have those. And then the last thing that you're going to want to do, and I think if I were to do this again, I probably would take these apart to clean a little bit more on the inside. But when you start doing this, you have parts that are movable, and so you can use a little bit of this WD-40 or whatever lubricant you may have. It could be just something that is a machine type of lubricant, whatever all-purpose lubricant you may have in little spray containers. But this just make sure that everything is working best. And so I'm going to do that, and then as I go to wipe this up here, this is also going to lubricate the blade so that it is something that will protect the blade from becoming rusty over time, and that way we can also make sure that the next time we come to clean this, it's a little bit easier to use, a little bit easier to clean. Okay, so there's that, all nice and done. And then the next thing that I have is a pair of loppers. Loppers are pretty much the same way, and so what I haven't talked about with the two pruners is that there are pruners that are anvil type pruners, and so they stop, and those are used for certain purposes. I personally prefer the bypass, which means the blade bypasses this part of this anvil part of the blade, and so it doesn't stop. It goes all the way through, and so that is what you call a bypass. And so what I want to do with this one is show you what we do with this. And so this is a slightly bigger piece. This is an inexpensive bypass pruner. So I'm going to do the same kind of cleanup on this that I've done with the other things, just to make sure it gets all nice and clean before I start to sharpen. And so I'm going to go through here and clean this part of the blade, and he's not too gunky and dirty. And so I'm going to open that up just a little bit more and get in here and down in there. Alright, and then I'm going to do the other side and make sure it's nice and clean on this side as well, and there's no sap issues. Alright, so when you are working with these, it's very much the same way as it is with pruners, and so you have to be careful. First of all, this blade's a whole lot bigger, and then you can use whatever tool that you use. Could be a file, could be a whetstone, could be this little carbide sharpener that I have, and so you're going to want to, and I probably could open that up a little bit more and make sure that I'm not changing the angle of where this is being sharpened. And so I'm going to go through and start sharpening. You have one side you sharpen on, and you don't sharpen on the other side. You only remove burrs if they show up. So I'm going to go through and sharpen this all the way up. be burrs on the other side. I see it, feel a few. And I'm not doing any kind of beveling here. I'm just going straight across the top to remove any of those burrs that may exist. That feels much better. And then now that I have finished with this one, what I'm going to do is also do the lubrication on this one that I did on my other pruners as I cleaned them up. And so this one is one that will allow it to function a little bit better. Now the reason why it's important that you have your tools sharp is because if you are using a dull tool to prune, you'll do more work on damaging the stem, maybe flattening it before you cut it. And so you want to make sure that your blades are sharp so that when you go to cut your stems, that they are going to be a clean cut that will heal. And they don't really heal, but it will close over faster. So that if you are looking, for example, this is a sweet viburnum. If you're wanting to go through and prune with some of the pruners that we've cleaned over here, what you want to do is make sure you get a nice clean cut. You don't want to have something that's going to squish a stem. You want to make sure that your pruners are sharp. You end up with better pruning on your plants, and your plants will respond better than they would if you crushed them as you pruned them. So hopefully you guys will feel more comfortable taking care of your hand pruners and loppers in your own garden. Thanks for joining us today for Let's Talk Gardening. This is Lisa Sanderson with UF-IFAS Extension in Sumter County.